Welcome to the Augsburg panel with your host, Jake Zabel. So, hello and welcome to the August 2020 edition of the Augsburg panel. This is our actual second year anniversary since we started back in August 2018. So this is 2 years now of the Augsburg panel. I'm your host, Reverend Jake Zabel of the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia, member congregation of the Confessional Orthodox Evangelical Lutheran Communion. The Augsburg panel is a podcast produced by the Order of Knight George, which is an Australian confessional Lutheran media ministry where we have everything from podcasts to videos to books to papers, our website. If you want to find any of the Order of Knight George content, you can either go to our website, www.knightgeorge.info, or check out the Order of Knight George on either YouTube, SoundCloud, or iTunes. So, for this edition of the Augsburg panel, rather than having three pastors coming in and answer listener questions, I decided to get a first-year graduate pastor, a final-year seminarian, and then a fourth-year seminarian who's about to go on vicarage. And instead of just answering listener questions, I got our first-year grad pastor to send us a list of questions, which are some of the most common questions he's been asked since graduating. And this panel is then aimed to see if the pre-vicar and pre-graduate are ready for their placements on vicarage and ordination. So we'll start by starting with our pastor first. So our guest is Pastor Reverend Shaun Manning. Shaun, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us where you're a pastor and a bit about your congregation?
Right. Well, thanks, Jake. And yeah, you introduced my name. So yes, I'm Pastor Shaun Manning down in the southeast of South Australia. My parish is the Naracoorte-Penola Lutheran Parish, which includes a preaching gig at Kingston. So they're unofficially a part of our parish. Yeah, that's about it. I don't know how much else is needed, but that'll be about it for me.
Cool. And you were ordained back in December last year and installed in, I'm assuming, January this year?
Yeah, correct.
So have you had a good first year out in the ministry?
It's overall I would say it's been fairly good. Obviously sort of just got the ball rolling, and then the restrictions kicked in, and so we didn't have church for a couple months, which was just as long as I had been here doing church, and so sort of we hit about up until things have resumed over the last several weeks. It was at about 50-50 online church and in-person church. So that sort of threw a few curveballs, but I think with support around, I think I've coped with it okay, and as well as I think the parish has been sufficient during that time as well. Yeah, so generally it's been a good start, but obviously it's just different to what we would have thought going out. But I don't know how to start any other way now. This is just how I started, so yeah.
Cool. So our second guest is our final year seminarian, Roland Adams. Roland, would you mainly just introduce yourself? You've just come back from vicarage. Would you like to tell the listeners kind of where you've been vicaring and how that went for you?
Hi, my name's Roland Adams. Technically, I did the majority of my vicarage last year, but I was still involved this year down at Calvary in the southern half of South Australia as well. Again, we were sort of riding along, and all this social isolation came in, and we've had to adjust, which has led to some interesting situations, both in regards to the academic requirements of vicarage and the practical requirements.
And our final guest is our fourth-year seminarian, Mitch Kitson. Would you like to, basically introduce yourself a little bit and maybe just tell people how seminary is, since you're not a pastor or a vicar yet?
Yeah, I like how you gone in order of importance there, Jake. My name's Mitch. I'm a fourth year ALC student. So studying to become a pastor, hopefully within the next sort of 18 months or thereabouts. So pretty exciting time coming up for me, obviously. I guess as you head towards vicarage, you start to think pretty seriously about the ministry and all that sort of thing. So lots of interesting conversations happening at the moment, and just looking forward to wherever we're going to end up. So me and my wife Olivia, we just got married in January, so we're sort of taking it all on together as well, which is good fun. So and life on campus here at ALC's, it's been a great experience for me. Really enjoyed both the study and just the community side of things as well. So it'll be sad to leave, but also pretty exciting. Who knows where we'll end up. So we'll wait and see.
Cool, thank you. And that's the introductions out of the way. The way the podcast will run is pretty simple. Shaun has given us a list of 9 questions. We then also have our final 10th question that I have for every podcast in 2020, asking our listeners about, asking our panelists about their favourite Martin Luther document. So, show's pretty simple. I'll go through each question. Each of you will be given a chance to answer, and I'll actually mix up the order, so it won't just be pastor, final year, fourth year each turn. Mitch, you'll get a chance to answer first. So we'll start off with our first question, which is page 6 shouldn't be done anymore, right, Pastor? So we will get Pastor Shaun to start off with this one. And would you like to start off by explaining to the listeners who don't know, what is page 6 referring to?
Page 6 is referring to the probably the most traditional order in the Lutheran Church of Australia's Lutheran hymnal and supplement. It's literally starts on page 6 of that book, and so it's called page 6. It's just a Holy Communion order, and I don't know for sure, but I think it's the oldest in our particular tradition that's still retained, I think.
So how would you answer this question from a parishioner?
Well, it's actually, it didn't quite come in this form just recently, actually. They had, I've chanted page 6 twice in my 6 months here, and one of them was on Sunday, and this question has been more of not really said in these words. It's more so said in the form of, with this going back to this order that we haven't heard for 20 odd years, who's your target audience? This is interesting, right? So I've had this, I sort of formulated this question as a result of numerous questions that have been framed in some sort of way around this. And it's, even the word shouldn't, it's sort of an interesting one. Even I had a family recently ask, does my child need to come to every confirmation session? And it's sort of like an exclusive sort of question. It's like not really the way you like to frame it. And even when I heard this question posed in some sorts on Sunday after church, it was, who are you targeting? Well, there's no target. It's a matter of trying to worship our God in a way that is pleasing to Him. And so there's no target audience per se. It's doing orders of service and having orders of service that are appropriate, so that the benefits that we receive from Christ in the service are given their rightful honour, and we respond appropriately to them. And I find page 6 to be one of them, and the other LCA approved orders of worship. So it's sort of it's a difficult question to answer directly. Shouldn't be done anymore, right, Pastor? Well, it's sort of the wrong way to put it. I think we should be doing orders of service that are approved by the church, as well as give honour to our God. That's sort of an introductory thought, and that's how I've basically answered it so far. And as well as, not all things in the order, in the service order and the liturgy are have the purpose of entertainment or absolute enjoyment when saying them. For example, confessing one's sins isn't particularly enjoyable. That was an introductory thought.
So we'll get Roland to answer this question in a second. So how would you, Roland, you're about to go out into the ministry, this question may come up. How would you respond if this question, or basically, as Shaun said, it wasn't really worded this way, but basically a version of this question, how would you respond regarding this topic of page 6?
It's interesting because during my vicarage experience, I had similar comments made to what Shaun said about from the younger people saying that, are we welcome to this service? This is the old people's service. And that was actually a common misunderstanding from some of the younger people, was that the page 6 or the traditional Sunday was only for certain people. And in the same way, I would look at this question of, why shouldn't we be doing it? I would take this more as less of a question and answer, but more of an opportunity to speak to the person about, like Shaun said, what do you understand about the service and why do we do what we do in the service? So we don't just follow a service order because we've always followed that service order, nor do we reject a service order for the same reason. But instead, as Shaun said, the service orders are chosen and put together by very wise people who have studied it and thought about it very carefully about why we do and what we do for the benefit both of ourselves and for our learning, and also that we can worship God in an appropriate manner. Now, does that on the other side of that vein is, should it be the only service order? Probably not. Again, it's a teaching opportunity for people. But to say we want to reject a service order outright for any reason besides it not actually being appropriate in worship, not to a target audience, but actually in an appropriate worship, is probably not a good place to start from. Instead, we should start with, why do we do it? I think would be a better direction to take that question myself with people, and then move it into a learning opportunity where we then go back to Scripture, we can go back to the confessions, we can even go back to the large and small catechisms and other such teaching tools, or even back to the Church Fathers, so that people can see that there is this continuation of worship through the times. This isn't something that just came out of nowhere and we went, right, we like this, we're going to keep doing it. And that's sort of where I would take it.
And Mitch, you're hopefully at the end of this year going to head off on vicarage. You can imagine this being on vicarage or being a pastor once you're ordained. Either way, how would you respond to such a question?
Yeah, well, I suppose in my experience, I haven't actually done page 6, so to speak, that often. But when I have, it's funny how familiar that it feels, because so many of our service orders are actually pretty much grown out of that anyway originally. And like Roland was saying, it's kind of just an extension of what's already been done before in the church through the ages. So in terms of its flow and the parts that actually make it up. So I think by all means go for it and use it, because it's a great resource for worship. It's thoroughly scriptural. It's a big part of our heritage as a church, actually. And I think more importantly for a worship order, maybe not more importantly in scripture, but it's in the common memory of the people. So, and I think that's a really important thing, because they're able to participate in it without really thinking too hard about what comes next and things. They can just wholeheartedly participate, which is a great thing. And I believe that that's what God would want us to do in worship. So yeah, it must be biblical, and it must be sacramentally focused, which of course it is as a Holy Communion order. So everything points towards communion in that way. So by all means use it, because it does these things well, but so can so many other worship orders. So it's not a yes or a no. It's a, well, why not? And if there's other options that do the same thing well, then go for those too. So yeah, interesting question, and I can see this coming up. I've come across these sorts of things before, so it is good to think about and good to have an answer for, I think. So good question.
And I was just going to add, before we went on to the next question, I like the point you made there, Mitch, about the familiarity of like page 6. So like in our church, our service order is essentially page 6, but we've made a few alterations, so it wouldn't be exactly the page 6. But when we've had people visit and stuff, maybe they might stumble over those few the places where we are different, but they can follow like 99% of the service and understand what's going on. And there is the fact that, yeah, if you use a page 6 order or an order that's similar to that, people can quite easily follow on. Whereas if you go something that's completely new and contemporary and just nothing like that, you have visitors rock up and then they don't know what's happening, and they can get easily lost, and that can often be off-putting for people. We'll move on then to our second question. So the second question is, modern stuff is loved and old stuff is hated by the current generations. I like how these questions that you've sent us, Shaun, they seem to basically imply their own opinion as they're asking the question. Rather than being a question themselves, they're like already implying an answer. And so I'll get Mitch to start with this question then. Is it true that modern stuff is loved and old stuff is hated by all the young people?
Look, it's pretty easy to generalize, isn't it? And I guess you can assume that, sure, young people prefer things created by other young people. I think that just makes sense, doesn't it? As older people often appreciate things that were created by people that of their own generation. And it can work other ways too, by all means. But I think that's just generally how it works out. But I think, many young people enjoy and wholeheartedly participate in traditional worship styles, quite often, mostly because they understand it and they know it. If you've been brought up in the church and you understand traditional worship styles and orders and songs and all sorts of things, then there's no reason why you can't use those as well. So yeah, easy to generalize, but does it really matter what people prefer and want in terms of music and style? It's an interesting one. Because people can either enjoy it or not enjoy it. But does that mean that it's not active and not doing something? I don't know. Maybe not. So it's interesting. But a big part of it too, I think, is how it's done. So if say you've got a more modern worship style and a song list that's no older than 5 years, but it's done poorly, then not many people are going to really connect with that. So and the same goes for traditional older style worship. So. So I guess there's lots of things at play here, aren't there? And I guess it's more a question of worship rather than culture, I think. Yeah, so interesting.
Shaun, would you like to give your answer to this question?
Yeah, well, I'm just remembering when this conversation sort of came up, and I recall sitting here with my pastoral assistants. We've got 5, thankfully enough, it's a decent number for not a huge congregation, and I was trying to get down to the bottom of what their concerns were, because we kind of have a system, and I don't know if it happens in all parishes, but what I've kind of inherited here is there's a bit of an appraisal time. So if there's anything over the past month that has come up and people have, they may hear complaints or praises or whatever, and anywhere in between, they kind of get fed through, if not directly to me. People feel more comfortable being anonymous, perhaps, I don't know. And so it'll feed through the pastoral assistants. And so after I, sort of bouncing off the first question a bit, after I led a page 6 service for the first time, it almost, set the cat amongst the pigeons in a way. They were sort of freaked out a bit, and there's a lot of talk, and some of that talk got fed through me, and there's a couple of people who spoke to me directly, but not really. And anyway, one of them, and I was trying to get to the bottom. I didn't do this with everybody because this is a little bit more intimate. I was trying to get to the bottom. What is it that you're actually concerned about? That this is, that this was done. What is it that's really going on here? Eventually, what happened is something like this question, which was, we're going to scare people off, particularly the younger ones. We're going to scare them off if we go down this path. And it was funny because the youngest pastoral assistant, which is younger than me, is a lot more traditional than me. And he's, 29, and he was saying, actually, it's the modern stuff that perhaps lacks a bit of depth that turns me off. And actually, there's a bit of a wave. In his opinion, there was a bit of a wave in sort of a younger generation to have a love for
More liturgical,
more depth, and more confessional in some regards. And of course, again, like Mitch said, this overgeneralizing in either sorts is interesting, but it is you've got to be careful to do. But there interestingly has been I think a trend going where it seems as if there was a particular generation who are close to retirement now, who bought onto this very thing and went modern, and then there's the current generation of pastors who are graduating more seem to be older, and what I mean by older is 40 years old liturgy, not 200 years old or 1700 years old like the Orthodox Church. We're talking 40, 50 years in the church, which is a very small time, by the way. So actually, I don't know. I think if you really were to, it's hard to generalize, but if you really were to argue it, I think there's a case to be made for both. And I think what it comes to, of course, at the end of the day, is not about who loves what and who hates what generations. It's more about doing what you do with authenticity. So if you go through one thing that I don't like to talk about praises, but is that one thing that I've heard that some people have appreciated. They've hated some of these service orders before I got here, but they appreciated that I did it with a sense of genuineness, not just going through the motions, and actually trying to teach it as I'm doing it, not just saying things and doing things for the sake of it. And so I think it's more about authenticity than it is about what's new, what's old. Anyhow, that's enough. I'll give Roland a crack.
I was just going to comment there, like your point you're making about like this generation and this like you're talking about a wave of people. I've tended to find that there does seem to be a lot more in the, I think what they call the millennial generation, that have been moving towards a more high church traditional liturgy. I mean, churches like the Anglicans, the Orthodox, the Catholics have their youth numbers have grown, and I mean, I know from my personal experience, a lot of the like members that we've managed to get are generally people that either they have come out of like Protestantism and they like Lutheran, they like the Lutheran theology, but what they like about us is that they also they don't like Catholic theology, but they do like the Catholic liturgy. And so when they see Lutherans having that similar liturgy, they go, oh, okay, now I can have the Protestant theology and the Catholic liturgy all in one. And also there's the other people, you've got people on the opposite side, though, that have come out of things like Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, which either they may be wanting to flee that, and so that doesn't help, or there are other people that they don't want to give up that kind of liturgy, but they do like the Lutheran theology. And so when they find a Lutheran church that's more traditional, it helps them. But yeah, I do. There is, I think, a trend. There was a, like you say, like it's now kind of the retiring generation. I remember hearing a pastor, an LCA pastor, who mentioned that he said, like, the LCA is basically 30 years behind what the current trends are. So we're now getting all this modern stuff, but that's what people wanted back in the 70s and 80s. Whereas the people now want the more traditional stuff, and while the people are looking for the traditional stuff, we're busy moving away from it. So we're actually lagging from the actual what people want.
Just last thing with that was just going to say that I think I've shared it with Mitch before, but I've been to Latin Mass on Payneham Road with a few Catholic friends, and Latin Mass, at least in the Western tradition, is as old as it gets. And I went there expecting to see a lot of grey heads, and there was young families, young couples everywhere, and even, like, you know, and they don't require, I guess, but they strongly encourage their women to wear head coverings, right? And I was probably somewhere in the middle, at least in terms of age demographic. It was very interesting. Anyhow.
Good point. Roland, how would you want to answer this question, that young people love new stuff and hate old stuff?
Again, I think this is another one of those misunderstandings about, less about love and hate, but I think more about, because they weren't brought up in it, they don't feel that they're invited to it. And so as they learn about it and they unpack it, they go, this is pretty good. And but in the same way, we can look at some of the modern music and say, hey, some of this is pretty good too. Yeah. As I like to explain to some of the people, because again, these were questions I faced on vicarage. And I explain to people, these so-called old hymns that we've got were at one stage new, cutting-edge, modern songs. And, you know, and it's again this whole concept of, just because something is old doesn't mean it's loved or hated. We need to look at what's happening in it. What's it saying? What's it teaching? What's it doing? And again, it's the same with the newer things. I was quite fortunate because I spent a fair bit of time in the school attached where they were using what I would consider cutting-edge modern songs. And some of them were quite good. And it's funny because some of them were the old songs to new music. And that was something that made me smile, because we see this time and time again. We see the old hymns being redone and modernized. And in the same way, I do hear people say, that was a nice hymn, but it was too slow. Sometimes I can hear that from people, you know, and these sort of just basic, it was all right, or I don't understand what half the words in this song mean because they've left all the old English in it. So again, that can lead to issues. But again, I think this whole modern stuff is loved and old stuff is hated is, again, it's very much, it's a small vocal minority who do all the complaining. And a lot of people actually, it's funny because I was speaking to quite a few of the young students from the primary school, and they listened to the music that was from the 50s, 60s and 70s as well. And so they're listening to what they call old music. And it's interesting because what a lot of people in our congregation would consider new songs are what our young people would consider old music, because a lot of our new music is from the 90s or even the 70s and 80s. So it's not new music anymore. It's like, I think you said, Jake, we're lagging 30 years behind when it comes to these things. And what we think is cutting edge has already moved on. But in the same way, it's like the liturgy. It needs to be understood, what is the purpose of this song? Is it just to make us feel good inside? So are we just singing pop songs because they're pop songs? Or what is the purpose of these other songs? Are they teaching? Are they growing us? Are they helping us to understand who God is? And in the same way, some of the old songs, whilst they do that, they can go for too long. I know occasionally, I personally have winced when I've seen one of those 12-verse hymns come out. And I'm just like, right, this song's going to go for 10 minutes. But, and again, we all have our personal biases when it comes to music. And we need to understand that. And in the same way, I like to point out to people that what you say now is new will become old. Will it pass the test of time? What is its theology like? What is it teaching? Is it singable by a congregation? Is the other thing that has helped a lot of the old hymns pass the time. They're not designed to be sung by a band at the front. And all these sort of, again, these are teaching opportunities for people to help them to look at, why are we doing it? Why do we do it? And so I like to think that all these opportunities, they're really good growth things. But that's just my 2 cents.
Yep.
I did like your point about, what is old used to be new and what is new will one day be old. I mean, it's actually interesting if you go through the Lutheran hymnal of the LCA, finding how many hymns in there are actually only like late 1800s. Like, they're only like just over 100 years old. They're not like, ones that are like from, the year 300 and stuff like that. I mean, we've got some of those. But then interestingly, I think is it O Come, O Come Emmanuel, which is quite a very popular Christmas hymn. That's an English, what we have, it's an English translation of like a Latin hymn from like the 300s or something. So yeah, ones that stand the test of time. Beautiful song, by the way. And so the next question is, to pulpit or not to pulpit? That is the real question. Roland, pulpit or not? Basically, this is less whether you will, and people are going to ask you. So how would you respond if somebody's asking you in the congregation whether you're going to get up there or not?
Again, this is a very situational in regards to the congregation and the sort of sermon, and again, even the preacher. I personally am a bit of a pacer when I preach, so I like to have a bit of freedom to move around up the front. But I can also use a pulpit where needed. Pulpits also have the advantage of allowing you to have all your notes in front of you, which is also an incredibly useful thing for a sermon. Well, again, what I like to explain to the congregation is, what was the purpose of the pulpit? Why were they put in there in the first place? They were put in there to help the pastor be a bit more elevated so he could project his voice. Now, we have microphones that have sort of negated that a fair bit, but still, it's a useful thing to allow, and it also hides the pastor. So it's not him speaking to you, but him speaking on behalf of God to the people. And so, again, it's sort of, this is a question that I haven't really faced, because most congregations will be pretty relaxed with it depending on their pastor. And now, again, I suppose it depends on the pastor and on the congregation. Now, if you're a more traditional worshipping style, then yeah, you'll probably be in the pulpit. Whereas if you're in the more modern amphitheatre style, you'll probably be out in the open, maybe with a microphone stand or something, or a music stand. Now, again, I personally can't see an issue either way here. Again, I prefer the pulpit myself despite pacing, because it can hold all my notes. It can hold my glass of water and anything else I need. But For me, I don't see this question being an issue. With this question, I would unpack deeper. What is this question leading into? Is this a question about tradition versus modernity, in which is a different situation entirely?
We'll get Mitch. You want to answer this question second?
Yeah, I think in terms of when you come to your place as a graduate pastor, say, and you just arrive at your new church and they've had a pastor previously who used the pulpit all the time, then I think I would generally default to what has always been done and what people are used to, initially at least anyway, before then sort of learning about what's behind that. You know, is there a good understanding of, you know, in this example, preaching and what the pulpit is there for? If it's there and it hasn't been used, then we'll maybe just ask the question, is it worth keeping then? You know, why have it there if it's not going to be used? So I guess it's a matter of using the architecture of the building to the best of its function, I suppose. And that includes music and stuff too, you know, where your band is and where the organ is at the back and all that sort of stuff. So I think, I mean, who doesn't enjoy preaching from a nice big pulpit though, right? Like it's a good bit of fun as well. So I think if you've got a big solid thing like up at St. Petri where I kind of come from, and Shaun did his vicarage there as well, it's just good fun to preach from a pulpit too. So, you know, it just depends on the context of the place in the end.
And Shaun, your pulpit or not the pulpit?
Yeah, so what Mitch recommended is pretty much the opposite of what I did. So I came into this place and they said, you know, they had the chairman show me around and stuff when I first came to visit, and he was saying, oh, you know, there's the pulpit, rah, rah, and I don't know if he said it or if he said it in response to a question that I asked. I said, oh, is it used? And he's like, oh, no, it hasn't been used, and I don't know what's wrong. And I think he asked me what I was going to do, and I said, well, if it's there, I'm going to use it, right? It's there, I'm using it, and that's what I've done. I preached twice, I think, from on the floor, but that was because of practical reasons, because during the COVID thing, we had to spread out, and so we had like a foyer and then hall at the back, and so it spread off into 3 rooms, and if I was to go on the pulpit, then the people in the other room, definitely in the hall, when a little bit of the narthex wouldn't have seen me, and so I preached in front of the baptismal font and whatever else, so that people could actually see. And but other than that, I've been in the pulpit every week, and also I've been in the cathedra every week too. So that's been sitting there, and no one ever sits on it, right? Well, if it's there, I'm going to use it, and yeah, and I guess there's multiple things at play here. I think you've got, in particular, two major things. It's what's going on internally, with you as a person, as a pastor, that makes you want to listen to them or not listen to them. And then also, you've got this other dynamic, which is what's going on in them. What is it? What is it about the pulpit? Again, similar to the old styles of worship. What is it that makes them so scared about that? So I remember on my vicarage placement, there was sort of a tradition that sort of stuck, I guess, where it's just the first service uses it and the second service doesn't. And for me, I was just wondering what would happen, if you were to walk into the pulpit and use it every week, what would happen? And vice versa, I guess, to some degree. And I think it's a dynamic where it's sort of, there's something deeper going on where you have to go, okay, am I going to do what has always been done for me, or is it for them? And that's not always easy to work out. What I mean is, our personality type could be one that is more agreeable, and so we tend to want to keep people happy, and that we all want to do that. and it might be, or you have the opposite personality where you have more of a tendency not towards being a people pleaser, but towards being a tyrant, I guess. My way or the highway kind of thing. And I guess you've got to find that balance for the benefit of yourself and for the people. And I think this goes back to the previous couple of questions as well, because it's like, you know, if the biblical witness is anything to go by, and our own lives, people really don't know what they need, or, the people of God are fairly, if we left it up to the people of God to decide what we should do in a church service, who knows what you get, and again, is the pulpit absolutely necessary for a divine service? Of course not. But I guess it's always about the why not, and what does it symbolize? How does it honor the word of God? It's a complicated one, actually. It seems like an easy question, but it's very complicated. It's very complicated. There's so much going on.
I was just going to say on your comment there, Shaun, about trying to have this balance between being a people pleaser and a tyrant. I think it was Sasa, but I don't quote me on that, just in case it wasn't Sasa. But it was it's either Sasa or one of those other big named Lutheran theologians who made this comment. He said that as a pastor, he said, you're the servant of the congregation, not the slave. So you're there to serve, but you're not there to be bossed around either. And I always thought that was a good way to think about it. For me, I don't really get a choice on what I do with the pulpit, because we're a small church. We've just basically got our own little chapel that we've basically it's an old outside office we've converted into a chapel, and so we don't have a pulpit or anything, so I have to just stand. I mean, I have been wanting to get a little lectern to use, but I'm waiting till I can get like something that's an actual proper little wooden lectern. I don't just want to do the little, screw up little metal music stand. I think that kind of looks a bit... I'd rather just hold my notes. But I mean, two things I really liked about the pulpit is, one, I don't know, I tend to get my legs just get tired, and I like to be able to just lean against the pulpit rather than have to be standing on my whole weight the whole time. But the other thing is also, I tend to, when I talk, I like to emote with my hands and use them a lot when I'm talking, especially when I'm trying to emphasize something. And when I don't have a pulpit or anything and I have to hold my notes in front of me, it really limits me being able to do that. And so I'd enjoy being able to sit my notes on a lectern or something so that I could just move my hands again, because I was going to tell you guys, and for the listeners can hear this too, an interesting story one of the lecturers said at seminary when I was there about the idea of using pulpits, of why it's important to talk to the congregation. He went once as a visitor to a congregation, and so they had a pulpit there, and he went up to use the pulpit because he always used the pulpit, and he was doing the sermon, and like at one point he banged on the pulpit to really emphasize his point, and like really made the whole congregation just sit up and watch, and he thought, oh man, this must be a really great sermon and everyone's listening, until after the service he found out that they never used the pulpit, and it's basically left there as an old ornamental thing, and it's not actually bolted down. And so the people, why they paid so much attention is that they were worried it was going to tip over on him, especially when he banged it, because it's just not attached to anything. So yeah, sometimes check.
I just want to jump in here, Jake. Jump in here for a second, Jake. We also need to understand what is the difference between a pulpit and a lectern. In the modern time, we use that word interchangeably, but they were different. And that's, again, I'm not going to go into it now, but again, that's a teaching opportunity for people to understand the different roles of the two positions. And we often will group, like many churches will say, oh yeah, we've got a pulpit, but it's actually a lectern. And again, this is something that we've let slip a little bit, but it's something that we need to be aware about if we're facing this question. I was just had that thought then.
Yeah, you got a good point there. To keep us moving along, we'll get on to the next question, which, what are you going to change? Yeah, I mean, that can sometimes, interestingly, can be a question either from people who want you to change stuff or people that are worried you're going to change too much. So we'll go back to Pastor Shaun to start for this one. What are you going to change?
Yeah, well, I guess it's depending on where you're at. There might be a lot of things that you come out, because there's a lot of things that are fresh, come straight out, and there's a lot of things that, are very fresh on your mind to, how you've been drummed in and you've been, well, that's probably the negative way to put it. The positive way to put it would be you've been soaked in this liturgics and all this stuff. And so you come out going, oh, gee, righto. Oh, even like chapel every day, done a certain way, and you come out and you're like, oh, righto. And, so even coming here, I inherited some service orders that, I don't know, I think have been floating in and out and they had a rhythm about which Sunday was which Sunday. I don't know how long. I don't even know if it was my predecessor or the pre-predecessor or whoever it was. I don't know. But I inherited some stuff that was just sort of their own personal adaptations of a communion service. And sometimes it was, you could see and it was understandable, and other times it was, where did that come from? It was very. And so I wrestled with that the first few weeks, and it was, so this is the context of the question, what I had in mind, which was, it was sort of like a lament from one of my pastoral assistants, which was, it's hard for us because every time a new pastor comes, certain things change and we got to adapt to it. And I think what her expression actually helped guide my response, and not only in words but in action, which was, if things are done in proper LCA approved ways by your own church, and they're not personal adaptations, then the changes should be very, very minimal, especially to the service orders. I mean, not in terms of style. Every pastor has their own emphasis in terms of their preaching style, but their emphasis in ministry. Some of them might have a big focus on the elderly, or focus more so on the young, or the focus on whoever. Not talking about that stuff. But in terms of the service orders, if the service orders are not made in the pastor's image, then the change should be very little in terms of worship style. So I had the decision to make early on, and with a bit of teaching, with several conversations, I said to the worship committee as well as my pastoral assistants, is that I only feel comfortable with doing what the church expects and what is LCA approved service orders, and that's all we're doing. How frequently you want to do them and what we do, and let's talk about that. But the order of service is going to be, and I laid it out in front of them, is going to be this 5, 6, or 7 or whatever it was, and this is what we're going to do. It could be more than that, could be less than that. I can't remember how many there is. But these are the approved orders, and this is what I feel comfortable with doing. So I had to make a decision early on, and it's also helpful when you've got an objective standard where it's not like I'm coming in and doing this. You're kind of pushing that actually somewhere else, which is this is what our church has approved, and we're a part of this church, and they want this for good reason, etc., etc. Several conversations, and so it was a pretty drastic change because all these services that they've been doing for X amount of years, we haven't touched again. So what are you going to change? I hope not a lot, but if you may need to change things if they're here, there, and everywhere and doing their own thing, sort of like an autonomous parish within a larger.
And Roland, you're not just about to be ordained. You'll be ordained probably by the end of this year. What are you going to get out there and change? Take your axe to a few things as soon as you get out there. Change the world, fix the church, Go for it.
Yeah, probably very little initially, unless I come into an issue that is drastic and is affecting people majorly. I am cautious about implementing changes for the sake of change. Again, it comes back to the whole, what's going on and why are we doing it? Now, am I going to say, right, I don't want, we're going back to the traditional services because they're in the book, or we're going back to these things? If the service orders are completely out of order in the church, possibly, unless there's a very good reason for it. But again, as a fairly new person to ministry and serving with people, before I would go and make any massive changes, there would be quite a few conversations both with my elders, my pastoral carers, and potentially even with other ministers and my bishop. Because these guys are guys who have been here for a long time. They probably have reasons why we operate like this. And, you know, again, I'll speak to my experienced pastors, and they may say to me, no, you're making a bit of a mountain out of a molehill, or, yep, that needs to be corrected. But again, it's very hard for me to say this when I'm looking at it from a completely hypothetical position without any information on any context of a congregation. But I think, again, flexibility is very important, because you need to understand that you're their pastor and their shepherd, but they're going to be there long after you leave. They were there before you came in, and they will be there after you leave. And that you're there to serve them and help them grow. And I think that's the important thing is it beneficial to them? As St. Paul writes, you know, we do all things for all people, and we stretch a little bit to serve others. But again, we operate within the confines of what is approved by the LCA. There is quite a bit of flexibility in regards to what is in a service order, you know, but as long as it contains the necessary parts and they're in a good working order. And so I think for me, this question is very much I'm very cautious about going into things and changing them or not changing things until I can get a good working idea of any context.
And Mitch?
Yeah, I'm with both of these guys. With saying, you don't change anything unless it's desperately needed, and and you work with people on that. But I think it's important to note that it's not just me making the change, but actually I need to teach or educate or encourage us all to make this change together, because that's really what's happening here. It's not about me imposing stuff because I know best. Yes, I've been trained and educated and ordained, but I'm there, like Roland was saying, to serve the people. And so you work from underneath rather than from above. That's the approach I would take. So, and in the end, it's no change is possible without the Spirit's guidance, obviously too. So with a lot of prayer and thought and conversations, change can happen. If necessary, but it's done with God's help.
So the next question is, does the law still apply? Gospel only, right? Roland, we'll get you to start for this one then.
Right. So, yes. That can be summarized in one word. But, again, it's a nuisance situation, because law and gospel need to be held in tension with each other for them both to do their jobs. Again, however, you need to understand in the context of the person you're speaking with. Some people already are being hammered by the law. They're broken. And they don't need any more law being dumped on them at that exact moment in time. But to say we're going to get rid of the law or the law doesn't apply anymore, no, that's not a good way to take it. That's called Antinomianism, and that is rejected by the church outright. Again, in the same way, The gospel needs the law to do its job. Without the law, the gospel is just this soft, weak, sort of huggy thing that we don't understand the purpose of if we haven't got the law to hold up to ourselves first.
Mitch.
Look, yeah, he's given a pretty good, solid answer there, hasn't he? It's a pretty core doctrine of our faith, obviously. But I think it's funny how often that it can be confused. You know, law is bad, gospel is good. Like, sort of, yeah, but yeah, as Roland was saying, the law is what we need to realise our need for gospel. You know, why do you even want the gospel in the first place? Well, it's because you need it. Yeah, so I mean, it seems like a pretty obvious answer to us, but it's funny how often this question might be asked of you.
And Shaun, any further comments?
Yeah, I think so, because I just want to provide a context. Obviously, it's sort of hard to know with these, like just giving you guys the questions without the context of where my mind was at in situations and people that I'm thinking about when these questions come and various forms. Typically, it sort of comes in some sort of sense of, you know, in the old days it was all fire and brimstone, and these days it's all, you know, that's away with now, and da-da-da-da. That's so 100 years ago. It's like, you know, we don't need the law anymore. Like, we don't need to hear, and it's multi-layered. I think it starts from, unfortunately, it starts from our own perception of who Christ is, I think, you know, if you preach on the Gospels, which I imagine you have or you will, Jesus doesn't always say nice things, what we would consider nice, you know, he confronts the arrogant and the unrepentant, and he comforts the humble and the repentant, you know, and it's an absolute necessity to rebuke in those moments. And I guess, you know, that one part of what is kind of thrown off is like, oh well. So what I mean is, like, as a pastor, for example, if you have that perception of Christ that he is only there to comfort, forgive, and reassure, then that's who you're going to be, and that's what your sermons are going to look like. You're only going to have a cheap grace with no context no context of law to bring the gospel to. And that's how you live, actually, and that's how I know the temptation in myself, and so I think it comes back to one's perception. And I think we conveniently look over certain bits of scripture that are confronting as Christian people, as pastors, and as lay people, and we go, oh, he didn't. You know, in our minds we might say, oh well, yeah, I know he kind of does that, but you know, what he's really about is, you know, he's not about keeping tables or pronouncing words and things like that. He's really just about comfort. And it's like, well, which scriptures are you reading? It's not really. Anyway, I think it's deeper than yeah. And the reason why I mentioned it in this context of worship was just because it's sort of it's similar people and similar spiritual sentiments will also complain about the confession and the use and the words of the confession and stuff like this, and not really like to talk about that stuff either.
The next question is to baptize or not. This would be an interesting one. How about you start, Mitch?
So just important to mention the context. It's the approach to. I put it under the heading of community involvement and approach to non-members. So we're talking about to baptise or not in the tricky situations of lapsed or non-members come out of the blue, want you to baptise. That's the context.
Good, thanks for that.
Yeah, well, I think context is pretty important for that one, isn't it? I think well, a lot of teaching needs to be done there and working out, well, what are we baptizing this person into, and why would we do that? Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's such a complex sort of thing, isn't it? But I think your first step should be, well, what do you believe? What's the faith that you confess? And what are we baptizing into, in your opinion? How do you see that? And then I guess, yeah, you go from there and work out, what the go is there, and whether your church is the church that they should be in, or if they've got a different confession of faith, or so that understanding of their story and background, I think, is crucial before we even start talking about, a sacrament. So it's a pretty important thing, I think, to, plenty of conversations, be patient with it. Obviously, they might have a sense of urgency too, like they might have heard that, baptism gets you into heaven, so I better go get myself locked in. That's a good urgency to have, I guess, because, well, that's kind of true. But you need to understand what it is first, I think. But saying that, we baptize infants in our church, and so, that whole thing comes into the discussion too. So maybe I need to do some homework on that one too. It's a good thing I'm not ordained yet.
Roland, how would you handle this situation in the context that Shaun has mentioned it?
So, again, I see this as a really good opportunity because, again, like Mitch said, there's going to be a lot of teaching leading into baptism. Now, I have seen and heard of emergency baptisms happening outside of any pre-teaching, but that was very extenuating circumstances. Now, however, what needs to be understood is when we're teaching people for baptism, the Word of God is also reaching their parents. And I had the amazing joy of watching what was going to be one baptism turn into 4. As the parents and older sibling decided, as we were discussing these things and learning about them together, that they wanted to be baptized as well. So, I'm a big fan of, if a non-member comes in and says, hey, I've got a young child, I haven't been to church for 30 years, can you baptize my child? I'm going to say, okay, but there's a few steps we need to take first. There's a bit of an understanding of what is baptism, and we're going to work through this. But I'm also going to use it as an evangelism tool to that family and a way to encourage them back into the church, rather than saying, no, you haven't been to the church, you're not welcome. It's a great opportunity to say, hey, you know what? You're welcome back in as well. And maybe to help them understand what's going on with their own baptisms. But for me, I'm very heavy in the idea of welcoming people who aren't members, to bring along people to learn about baptism towards future baptism. Now, if someone comes storming into my office and says, you need to baptize me right now so I can get into heaven, I'm probably going to say, hang on, my friend, let's have a good look at this, what's going on here. Also, in the same way, I'll help them say, look back at them and say, have you already been baptized as well? Because they may be coming in to be rebaptized, which we don't do. And so these are key points that need to happen. I say to them, I will often use different analogies to work with people to build them up so that they get an idea of what actually is going on. Whether I may use the example of a wedding and saying, you're not going to meet someone and race off right now and get married. You're going to want to learn about them first. And it's the same way for us. Now, God is always ready for us to come to him. But sometimes we need to learn more about who God is and what it means for us. And, it's just this great teaching opportunity for people in regards to baptism.
And Shaun, this is your question. What's your answer?
Well, I think your general framework is hopefully akin to God's own heart, which is you want that person and people baptized. That's what you want. And I guess it's just not always, of course, with human beings and their contexts, and it's just never as easy as that, meaning how it plays out. So what I mean is that there's sort of a spiritual diagnosis as in your responsibility as pastor, that you want to know where these people are at, so that you can bring them God's word to expose something evil for the sake of healing. You know, there might be a wound. What I mean is that there's a wound there that needs to be attended to, and if you're too flippant with it, you're like, oh yeah, let's do it. You know, come in a couple of weeks and we'll come on a couple of Sundays, no drama, let's do it. And you know, it's a little bit throwing pearl amongst swine. You know, you're not treating the holy things of God in the way that you should. Does that mean that the baptism is not legitimate? That's not the point. It means that you are not caring for these people as you should be, and actually caring, you know, treating the holy things of God properly. So you know, and yeah, so I think that's probably the short answer to that. I think it's very complicated, isn't it? It's very, very complex.
Awesome. Well, the next question that we've got here, and so this is again in the context of approach to non-members and that situation. You would never turn away an opportunity, would you? Roland kind of already said that he wouldn't turn around. Roland said he wouldn't turn away any opportunity, but yeah, I will get you, Shaun, to answer first, so you can help give context to what you mean by opportunity here.
Yeah, so on the bit of paper, I've got them close together because they kind of build off each other. The first one, to baptise or not, is more so about what's your role, what's your goal in terms of this family, these non-members or very distant lapsed members who have come to you. And then the second one is more so maybe has come to me in a frame, from the angle of a parishioner. So a parishioner has asked me, you know, because anyway, I've had a predecessor in the last 3 or 4 predecessors. I think, as far as I hear, I've had a wide spectrum of people who approach these, I guess, what you'd call educational services of baptism, funerals, weddings, in similar ways. So I've got everything from treats it very flippantly, yeah, we'll do it, no dramas, to ones who have said, who have heavily questioned why they want to do this, and that family have ended up getting really upset about the questions and then leaving the church. So I've got a wide range of, you know, ones who have been very stringent and ones who have been very flippant. So I've had a question posed to me about the person who was very strict, which is usually the people who get in trouble, by the way, not the people who are flippant, at least from a human point of view. People who are flippant tend to get away with things, but that's another topic. And so I had, you know, and this has come from a person who I really like. He's a lovely guy and lovely people in your congregation who say, oh, you wouldn't do something like that, would you, Pastor? You would never question people if they wanted to come to the church and get their kids baptised. And it's like, oh, gee, that's not a yes or no answer, you know. You know, the short answer might be no, but it's more complicated than just no. It's actually, I'm going to deal with this partial situation in the best way I can, so that person, so that God can work with this person as best in the way that He wants, and that is to rebuke and comfort, and because it's really not about the, you know, in the case of a funeral, baptism, or at least them two, it's the concern primarily is not about the person getting baptized or the person getting buried, really. It's not really, that's not the major concern. The major concern is the people who have knocked on your door, the parents or the kids of the parents who have died, stuff like this. This is who God wants you to deal with, particularly. And so, no, I hope I wouldn't turn away an opportunity, but there may be a time that I need to say no. I know one of our graduates, another graduate, had to say no to a situation, and this was just ridiculous. I don't understand what the family were thinking. Who said, "Oh, Pastor, we wanted you to do the funeral, but we don't want any Christian stuff in it." Okay, but hang on, what? You know what I mean? And then he dug a bit deeper, and he said, "Listen, I'm not quite comfortable with not talking about God, this sort of thing." And they said, "Oh, okay. Well, can we just at least use the church?" No, you can't just use the church, And that's a pretty obvious moment to say, actually, no, I think you should go somewhere else.
Roland, like you said, you kind of said you wouldn't turn away an opportunity, but here's your chance to explain that in more detail.
So, like Shaun said, normally you wouldn't. Unfortunately, however, there are times where you have to. Like that example. Another example is someone who has a legal requirement to not actually go into the church, be it a restraining order from someone in the church already, or another situation like this. These are situations, unfortunately, that might happen. I'm fortunate I haven't had to deal with anything like that yet, but it may happen. And again, for me, it's a teaching opportunity for the person. I'm not going to say a blanket, I would not turn anyone away. I would love to welcome anyone in, but unfortunately there are circumstances where you can't. Now, what you can do is you can find the best way to serve them. Maybe direct them towards another church, help them unpack the problems that they have that are stopping them from being able to come to the church. Help them deal with these issues. But again, I would love to open my doors to everyone. But unfortunately, we can't these days. Unfortunately, there are some people who can't be allowed in for or are not appropriate. But again, this is another opportunity to still bring the love of God and the Word of God to them. Even this other group, you can explain to them of why is God so important in the funeral. And maybe you can talk to them about it and maybe bring them in. If they're adamant about it, then unfortunately, sometimes you do have to say no. Unfortunately, that's life, but I'd love to say yes, but unfortunately we live in a fallen world where sometimes we do have to say no to people.
Mitch, you want to round out this question?
Yeah, I think, like these guys have said, it's on the basis of love, firstly. Yes, you might have to say no to allowing someone into the church for whatever reason or something like that, but at the end of the day, can I care for this person somehow? Is saying no some way of caring? Can I give them an alternative place to go, or point them somewhere else, or and I guess that's why you, as the pastor in a community, you build up these contacts and these places to point people, because I think it's not all dependent on me. I'm not the savior of the world, but other people can. God can work through other people. It's not always just going to be me. So, and I think if you make the assumption that if you turn them away that they're done for, that was the one chance, well, you're just going to be, have the burden of guilt for your whole ministry, because, it's just not the case. God will work how he wills, whether that's through me or someone else. So as hard as that can be to turn people away, it's not necessarily, the end of their faith journey.
I did like the final point you made there about how, God will work where he wills, and I think that's always the struggle of every minister, that you always have to have the humility to remember that we're just a vessel, and that it's not really up to us whether, that it's sometimes it could be, but you don't want it to be like it's our fault that these people aren't Christian, or it's it's our good work that these people are Christian. We need to have the humility to be like, when it's God's work, we'll leave it to Him. We just, as long as we're preaching the word and ministering the sacraments like we should, then we shouldn't really have too much guilt. So the next question, and I like this one, will you be out in the community? I think this is a good question for especially first years and people who are about to graduate, because some pastors are different. I know there are some pastors that basically wear their collar anytime they leave the house so that they can be identified as the minister, and there's other ones that they may wear the collar on Sunday, but basically as soon as Sunday service is over, try to really keep that quiet. And there are people that don't want to be that 24/7 pastor, when there are the other ones that kind of do. So who do I want to start with? Open question. Whoever wants to jump in first, you can grab the microphone. You can go.
I'll jump in on that one. So this is, for me, is quite a interesting question, because I'm very much community oriented. However, it's there is also that whole people need to understand when it's your time off, because having your day off is essential for your own health. I had the interesting experience on vicarage where I was, that because of the tightness of the community, that anywhere in that area I went, I was instantly recognised. And it was both good and bad. It was good because it gave me the opportunity to reach out to people and to let them see a human face attached to the church. On the other side, it does make it difficult to do anything menial, like going to the shops can take an extra 45 minutes. But yes, I would love to be in the community. But what I would love more is for the wider church to be in the community. Again, this comes back to the church is not the pastor. The church is not the building. The church is the people. And as such that, I would love for them to be out in the community as well. And for a lot of people, that's a scary thought. And so it's a tough one. I personally will be out in the community because I think that's the best way for me to serve God as well as my congregation. However, I must understand that I am called to the congregation, not the community. And so you have to balance your time commitments as well, because it's very easy to spend 30 hours out talking to people and suddenly realize you haven't done any of the work for Sunday. And so it's a balancing act. And that's something that needs to be considered.
Shaun, Mitch, who wants to go next?
I guess, so part of it, the context of the question was also got to do with like things like hobbies of your own, for example. Like since I got here, I've got there's Naracoorte and half a dozen outlying little places around, and they're all asking me who's going to play people, and so this is kind of their way of saying, are you going to be out and about? Like I know that previous guy, he was involved with art gallery and museum, and it's like that's not really my thing. You know what I mean? Like art gallery, museum, I just can't think of anything much. So we'll play footy. You know what I mean? And so I guess I think there's two sides to it. Roland's point in terms of your pastor, how do you spend your time in the office work and being out, like that sort of stuff, like with people. Is a good point, and I think, but also just to bounce back on something that Roland said, like people you find, especially in country towns, they're definitely out in the community, but it's a matter of what's their intention for being out in the community. So what I mean is, like, it's very difficult where I am. Like sport is humongous here, between hockey, netball, and footy. I'm trying to organise a day to do confirmation was at because we're free this night, or we're busy this night, we're free this night. So they're going to be out there. It's a matter of, are they out there being Christian, intentional Christian people? That's the question. So they'll be there. They'll be at the pub. They'll be at the sports club. They'll be here. They'll be everywhere. The golf course. Are they Christians where they're at? Well, they are, but I mean, are they intentional Christians where they're at? Likewise, will you be an intentional Christian / pastor in the community as well as your own community?
Yeah. Thanks for clearing that definition up for me, Shaun. That was actually what I meant by will they be out in the community. Thank you for clearing that one.
No, that's good. No, good. So yeah, you've got no problem with them doing stuff. It's a matter of, do they just see stuff for the sake of doing stuff? Do you know what I mean? And that's a good thing in a way. But then it's also, does you're the president of the local football club or you're on the board or something. Do they know that you're a Christian? It's good, And likewise, as a pastor, will you be just very parish focused, or will you go out and throw yourself around to do other things as well as your job? Because trust me, this is one thing that we all want to be liked, and if you want to be, this will be an extra thing that the congregation will love you for it. Like, this is all liturgical stuff aside, preaching stuff aside. If you're out and about and you're trying to get involved with stuff, whatever your interests are, they'll love you for it. And they love, and actually provides great opportunity for, and I'll give you say this to these two guys, it'll give you great opportunity. They love knowing that, that their pastor knows people that they know, if that makes sense, that aren't in the church. So it's like, oh yeah, your pastor, he was down here doing this and this and this. It's like, oh yeah. And it gives them a way of, an opportunity to go, yeah, that is my pastor. He's my pastor, actually, kind of thing. Anyway, that's enough there.
Mitch, got any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think, obviously it's good to be in the community to some extent, but I think it's good to know your limits too, just as a person. Extrovert, introvert, that sort of stuff. How much energy can you actually put into this sort of stuff? It's a matter of knowing your job description, I guess, partly, as an employed member of staff in a church, you can't always be working and always be, with people all of the time necessarily. But some people can do that and they thoroughly enjoy that. So I think that's a good thing. So you've just got to play to your strengths, I think, in a way. And just as a Christian, not even as a pastor, it's just being a public witness. So whether you're a pastor or not, I think that rule stays the same. Also, I think being out in the community and knowing people in a more casual sort of way can enrich your preaching a lot, because you actually know the people. You saw them at footy yesterday. That someone's kid broke their leg and they're really struggling with that. Whatever, I think that's crucial for preaching to your community. Otherwise, you're just going to seem like this detached sort of guy that we see on a Sunday, and he does a Bible study once a week, and he's great for that, but he doesn't know anything about what goes on. People aren't going to listen to you. So
yeah, I think there's the saying of, I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. That there actually is, a lot of the being a minister is not just word and sacrament, but actually worrying about the individual people and their lives as well. I will make one request to all three of you guys, if I can ask. No matter whether you're going to be in the community or be kind of very isolated, please make yourselves available when there's actual emergencies. We had one pastor, I remember in my congregation growing up, he had, in the bulletin, he says, my office hours are these times, these times, these times. Here's the office phone. If you need me, call me. And he had his mobile number. Only the elders knew the number. And so actually, when we personally had an emergency situation and we needed pastor, we had to ring around the elders until we could get onto one of them, so that we could get pastor's phone, so then we could ring pastor, because, well, it wasn't an office hour and we needed pastor right then and there. And so, yeah, if your pastor is that, kind of isolated, it really is not helpful. And so please ask yous to don't be that isolated. Get on to Shaun's last question, which is, Will you have much to do with the other churches? So yeah, this could be an interesting context. I mean, if you're in a few places in Australia, there may be other Lutherans around. Are you going to deal with them? Most standardly, this is more going to be like, are you going to deal with like the Catholics and the Baptists and the other major churches in Australia? But you know, let's see. We'll get Mitch to start with this one. Okay, that's a bit strange. Yeah, no, we've Mitch is here. We've just lost his microphone. We'll let Mitch fiddle with that. I might get Shaun then just to start with this question for a moment.
Well, yeah. So in this sort of come up in my context. I think because there's no Lutheran churches in town other than us and surrounding towns. The closest Lutheran church is an hour away, either side, Mount Gambier or Bordertown. And I guess there is some over the border too, but I haven't really thought of them much lately. But in my context, you've got a fairly, I think you're back, Mitch, are you?
Think so, yep.
Yeah, gotcha, mate. And so, I was just saying, in my context, Mitch, either side, there's no Lutherans. There's either, you've got Mount Gambier or Bordertown's an hour either side. But in Naracoorte here, there tends to be, and even in Penola, a fairly ecumenical mind frame. Like most people don't really have any angst with the other churches, and there's actually been some positive things out of that. But then I've seen some negatives, probably not the right way to put it, but I think probably a couple of interesting speed bumps. You know, what I mean is, I'm doing a pastor's class with some new members in just less than an hour from now, and you start to talk about, like, and these guys have come from different traditions throughout their life, different denominations, and being exposed to different churches, and if you teach anything that's got to do with exclusivity, it starts to get very sensitive. So what I mean is, if I say, oh, this is what it is, this is what the sacrament of the altar is, there's sort of a hesitancy to exclude other churches in that theology, even though they exclude themselves by having a different theology. And so, so it's a very ecumenical town. Like, there's a lot of friends that are in all a bunch of different denominations. But then it's finding that line, I think, between having something to do with them, but then also knowing that down the road they teach the opposite thing to what you teach. So, for example, I know that in the past, at least, there's the Pentecostal church down the road has told members or ex-members who have become their members that their baptism as an infant didn't mean anything, and that's not anything controversial because they believe that, and so it's sort of like we're on the same team, we're followers of Christ, but yet we're kind of not on the same team. And I found that a bit of a difficult balance to some degree. Even the one of the other churches wanted to do a joint youth group, and I thought, oh gee, we're going to teach different things at times, and I don't know if I can do that. But yet the pastor is a good bloke, talk to him, he's a Christian man, and we have good conversation, but I just don't think we can. We're still got to have our lines. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, that's a bit of context to the question then.
Mitch, we're back to you now that you've got your microphone sorted.
I think if we can put theology aside, which I think we're pretty good at doing, really, we're good at being able to acknowledge that we're different, and that's okay. But I think in terms of how we do things as individual congregations, whether that's cross denominations or even other Lutherans, like, we've got a lot to learn from each other, I think, and maybe something like a youth group, a joint youth group sort of thing, is pushing it a bit far because there's teaching involved. But I think it's, by all means, it's great to have connection with each other and at least a bit of fellowship, if anything. we don't have to hate each other. We can actually get along and at least have some kind of a relationship. Because like Shaun said, we are on the same team ultimately. We believe in the same God and all that sort of thing. So, and I think, more and more that's going to become more important as our numbers decrease a bit and, the world changes around us. We're increasingly countercultural. So we're going to have to join forces a little bit, to an extent. We're not going to compromise our core teaching or anything like that. But in terms of joining resources and that sort of thing, I think we need to start looking at that a bit more maybe. Obviously, each town is different and, context determines a lot of things. But, I do think we can learn a lot from each other, aside from theology.
And Roland.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. I have to agree. It's during my vicarage, I benefited greatly from my local ministers fraternal across the whole groups. Not only did I learn different ways of reaching out to community and serving them, but I also learned a lot more about my own Lutheran understandings by having discussions with them. I developed the ability to actually word things very importantly. But again, we need to understand, why are we working with them? What is the purpose of it? Are we just getting together as churches to, run a youth group? Sure. Are we going to run a combined service? Could be a bit iffy there, but you can come to an agreement that it's just it's a standard service. I'm probably not as much a fan of that idea, but in some towns, you don't really get a say in it. In some towns, you may be the only church where you get people from other denominations coming to you. And so on. But for me, I think it also depends on, are they willing to work with us? We've all, like Shaun said, we've got to hold on to our teachings and they've got to hold on to their teachings. And we both need to understand that, hey, there's things we don't agree on. But we are all brothers and sisters in Christ. And so we do have a connection. And they do have things that we can learn from them. And we have things that we can teach them. So I think working carefully with the other churches in the area is useful. But I think it's probably more beneficial just to have a working relationship with the other ministers in the area. And instead to have that working relationship with the other ministers, so that you can then say, so we go back to that earlier question about to baptize or not, or strangers. If you've got a working relationship with your fellow ministers in the area of other denominations, you can then direct them to that other minister, and maybe have that minister direct people to you who are more Lutheran. So I think having an honest, respectful working environment with your fellow ministers is highly beneficial.
And I was just going to, on this question more, you guys probably, depending on where you end up in Australia, you won't have to deal with this situation, but for example, I'm not an LCA Lutheran, I'm a minister in a different Lutheran group, and there are a few non-LCA Lutheran groups around. I mean, you won't find them mostly around Australia, but especially if you come to kind of the southeast Queensland area, there's probably like a dozen different little groups just in that little area. So how would you guys interact in that regard if you were in a situation where there was like a non-LCA Lutheran church down the road? How would you like to engage in that situation? Open question, whoever wants to jump in can answer it.
Try and steal their members.
Okay, good. Sheep stealing. Good idea.
No, I don't know, man. It's often where I'm at. Obviously, that's not in the thought patterns at all. I think it'd obviously be great to form a relationship. I think you're going to disagree on less, and I don't know, man. Plead the fifth on this one.
Mitch, Roland, any thoughts?
So again, it comes back to, we'd have to look at, why is that other denomination a breakaway first and foremost? Is it a major doctrinal issue we disagreed with? or was it something small and a misunderstanding? Now, and that will again affect how this will operate. And again, the other one is, are they willing to work with us? There needs to be that level of respect and equality with each other. And I think that's the important thing, is to understand that we're not coming at each other as opposition. We're coming at each other as, as equal servants to better serve our communities. And so I'm open to working with other denominations and other Lutheran ministers of other synods, same as international synods. As long as there isn't a major doctrinal issue that neither side can put aside, I'm happy to work with almost everyone. And I think, to a lesser extent, that can even include other faiths to serve the community. Now, that has to be understood, that we are working there. We're not worshipping together. We're not doing any sort of church thing together. But in a community event, we could possibly reach out to the other religions as well. So if we're doing a lunch or something, these are the sort of things that, as long as we can understand the whole separation of what are we doing, personally, I don't have a problem working with other groups entirely.
Any thoughts, Mitch, before we move on to the final question?
Yeah, I think, there's still fellow Lutherans, I think, even though they might be in another group of some sort for whatever reason. But I think a lot of constructive conversation can still happen. And I guess, both sides have to be willing to form that relationship. But I think a lot can be gained from that, from both sides, to be honest. So, open to that, for sure.
Okay, and before we get to our final question, I just want to remind everybody that the Order of Knight George has their own publishing house. You can find our books on Lulu. If you know what you're looking for, you can just look them up there yourself. Or if you go to the Order of Knight George website, www.knightgeorge.info, you just click on the Books tab and you'll be able to find the catalogue of books there. That's all the books we've published so far. And for each Augsburg panel, we have a book of the month, and our book of the month for August 2020 is written by a second or maybe third year grad from the seminary, Reverend Matuschka. This is his 60 Years of Grace, A History of St. Peter's Lutheran Congregation, Hobart. So this is a paper he wrote on the 60-year history of the St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Hobart. So I hope you enjoy that. And so the final question, which is the question I have for every panel for 2020, is what is your favourite writing of Martin Luther and why? So we'll go back to our founding order that we had at the start of the episode. Shaun, what is your favourite writing of Martin Luther and why?
Well, when you asked, or when I thought about answering this question, obviously there's many, but the one that stood out for me, I think, was probably the commentary on the Magnificat. And why? I think because, particularly in the LCA, but all sorts of strands of Protestantism, we have become, so anti-Catholic that I think we've lost a lot. And I think Luther finds that balance in the middle when it comes to his understanding of Jesus' mother and her role in the church, and I think it captures a particular part of spirituality that that our Lutheran spirituality, our Christian spirituality, that we've lost as a result of being so anti-Catholic, and that is one of them. And I think it's just a beautiful read, and it actually puts in perspective that whole topic of Mary, because I think we've gone so far to go, well, we won't mention her at all, just maybe for right reasons, maybe to safeguard certain bad teachings and bad practice. I don't know, but I just love how he explains that even if even when you look to Mary, there she is looking at her son, it's a beautiful piece of literature. That's it. That's all it's up.
I did like your point there about the kind of how much, even in Lutheranism, there does sometimes end up being a bit of a Mary phobia in some Lutherans. Like, one thing that I've pointed out is, like, we have a lot of churches like St. John, St. Peter, St. Matthew's. There are a lot of people that I do know a few churches that have, like, the name St. Mary's, but people are often quite put off and weirded out by that. And I'm like, well, why? It's no different to naming it St. John's, or I've known people that like St. Joseph's over Joseph the Carpenter, so why not Mary, the one who actually gave birth to Jesus?
And even, by the way, down here in Mount Gambier, St. Martin, right?
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah, I don't want to add to that. You said it well. That's it.
Roland, what is your favourite writing of Martin Luther and why?
So for me, I'm actually going to go in the opposite direction of that one. For me, it would have to be the Large Catechism, because in it he's expressing so much of, what we believe in such a really open way. But for me personally, I'm even going to go a little bit deeper. And my favourite part is what Luther does to the Ten Commandments. How this goes back to that whole law question again, where people see the law and they see this horrible, scary thing. But in the Large Catechism, Luther takes the Ten Commandments and he shows us how we are blessed by the laws that God gives us, especially the Ten Commandments. And he shows us that, it's not just about not doing things, but about doing them as well. And how they are a great benefit to us. But I love, especially the anniversary edition. Unfortunately, I was looking around and I can't seem to find my copy. I think I've lent it to someone on Vicarage and they haven't given it back, but that's all right. And it's a wonderful, easy read of who we are.
Good. And Mitch, your favourite writing of Martin Luther and why?
Yeah, look, maybe it's just because I'm a lowly fourth year and a bit of a simpleton, but it's got to be the Small Catechism, I think, for me. Not only is it useful for me, but it's a great tool for ministry to people of all ages, all levels of biblical literacy and faith, and for every stage of life. You really just can't go wrong with it. And obviously the Large Catechism accompanies that and deepens that really well. But I think, the Small Catechism, if you're a Lutheran and you don't own one, well, maybe you're not Lutheran.
Cool. Well, that wraps up our questions for the panel. You got something to say, Rob?
I just want to jump in quickly with another book that I really love at the moment, and that is a book called One in the Gospel, which unpacks the Formula of Concord. Now, it's not written by Luther, and the Formula of Concord wasn't either, but I find that is another really good book that expresses who we are as Lutherans. Again, it's another one that I've recommended to a lot of people to read over the years. So I thought I'd sneak that one there in as sort of a side note.
Well, while you've got the opportunity to plug it, why didn't you let the listeners know where they can buy a copy if they want to get one?
I think CPH has them, so you can just go onto their website and grab a copy. But mostly you can just speak to your pastor and he'd be more than happy to lend you his copy.
ACR would have them if they're in Australia.
Well then, that wraps up the questions for the panel. I hope the listeners have enjoyed this unique edition of the Augsburg panel. And I hope these questions have, especially in the cases of Roland and Mitch, help you guys think about what you're going to be doing when you're ordained and help prepare you for your ministry. And thank you guys for taking your time to come on the show. It's been good having you on.
Thanks you for inviting us.
Thanks, mate. Good to see you guys.
Goodbye and God bless.
God bless.